Welcome, collective. When an entire village shows up with pitchforks, it is rarely because you are weak. It is often because you carry something they could not control, could not silence, and could not put out. That is the truth of my story. I watched people who claimed not to like me somehow become deeply invested in me. Group chats formed, private conversations multiplied, screenshots were shared, alliances were built. People who had nothing in common suddenly found common purpose in one thing: trying to take me down. It was not random, it was not small, it was coordinated. It was emotional, psychological, and spiritual warfare dressed up as concern, justice, and righteousness. But what they did not expect was this. The same community that tried to bury me became the audience for my rise. There is a term in psychology called mobbing. It describes what happens when a group irrationally targets one person to isolate, discredit, and destroy them, often because that person exposes what others are unwilling to confront in themselves. That is what happened to me. I became the mirror people did not want to face. And instead of doing their own inner work, they chose to make me the problem. What they never understood is that I was not standing on their approval. I was standing on something deeper. My foundation was never social, it was spiritual. They needed an army to come against what I faced alone. That fact says everything. This was not one offended person or a few loud voices. This was a full community effort. People who could barely agree on anything suddenly became organized when it came time to betray me. They whispered, strategized, compared notes, and treated my downfall like a shared assignment. Some of them hardly knew me, yet they still enlisted themselves in the mission. Why? Because energy does not lie. They sensed something on my life that disturbed the comfort of their mediocrity. Instead of rising themselves, they tried to reduce me. Yet for all their numbers, support, influence, and planning, they still could not break me. I had no army, no shield from people, no social safety net. I stood with God, my resilience, and the truth. That was enough. They thought isolation would weaken me. They thought silence would break me. They thought rejection would make me disappear. Instead, it revealed who I really was. I was never made to blend in. I was never designed to depend on the crowd. I was built to survive storms that would have erased lesser foundations. Most people could not have endured what I endured. The attacks were relentless. The betrayal was intimate. The lies were bold. The public shaming was calculated. Still, I kept moving. I kept healing. I kept growing. While they recycled chaos, I was being refined. They called it power because they had numbers. I call it weakness because they needed numbers. Their unity was never rooted in truth. It was rooted in insecurity. They did not come together because I had wronged them. They came together because my presence unsettled them. I exposed things in them without ever having to say a word. My existence made them confront what they had buried: jealousy, resentment, fear, shame, and inadequacy. That kind of discomfort makes insecure people dangerous. Instead of turning inward, they turned outward. Instead of taking responsibility, they created a narrative. Instead of asking why they were triggered, they formed a coalition around blame. They dressed their hostility in moral language. They called it concern. They called it accountability. They called it protection. But beneath all the performance, it was insecurity looking for agreement. Some hated that I never begged to belong. Some hated that I stayed calm while they needed drama. Some hated that their manipulation did not work on me. Others simply hated that I remained myself in spaces that required performance. So they built a story. And for a while, they sold it. But lies need maintenance. Truth does not. That is why they had to keep checking in with each other, feeding the narrative, reinforcing the illusion, and repeating the same falsehoods until they could believe them. If they had truly been standing on truth, they would not have needed constant validation from one another. The very fact that they needed a chorus told me everything. I was not the source of their dysfunction. I was the exposure of it. And that was the part they could not forgive. They thought my strength came from them. That was their greatest mistake. They assumed I needed their praise, their access, their invitations, and their platforms. They believed that if they withdrew their approval, I would collapse. If they stopped clapping, I would stop rising. If they turned their backs, I would lose my identity. But they misunderstood me completely. I did not grow because of them. I grew despite them. Every withdrawal pushed me deeper into purpose. Every betrayal sharpened my discernment. Every lie forced me into greater clarity. Every rejection stripped away illusion. They thought they were cutting off my supply, not realizing I was never connected to them in the first place. That is what shook them most. Because in their world, worth is measured by visibility, alliances, applause, and social proof. But my life taught me something different. True worth is revealed in what you can survive without losing your soul. My identity was anchored somewhere they could not reach. They could attack my image, but they could not touch my essence. And because they never really knew me, they misjudged me. They only knew the version of me they had invented in their minds, the version they believed they could control, shame, or silence. But the real me kept rising, stronger, clearer, more focused, more grounded. That is why their attacks failed. They did not fail quietly either. They failed publicly. At first, they seemed confident. Their stories were polished. Their alliances were tight. Their version of events sounded convincing because it was repeated often. They believed the truth would stay buried and that I would remain under the weight of their projection. But lies always collapse under their own contradictions. One person slipped, another pulled away. Timelines stopped matching. Stories changed. People began asking questions. And once the right questions were asked, the whole structure started to crack. What had once looked like confidence became panic. What had once looked like certainty became avoidance. What had once looked like unity became suspicion and embarrassment. I did not have to expose anyone. I did not have to perform revenge. I did not have to defend myself in public. Truth did what truth always does. It surfaced. And when it surfaced, it did not do so privately. It did so in a way people could see. The same rooms that once entertained lies became the same rooms where silence grew heavy. The same people who once mocked me began avoiding eye contact. The same community that participated in the story had to witness its collapse. That is the difference between human retaliation and divine vindication. Human retaliation shouts, divine vindication reveals. They mistook my silence for weakness, but my silence was strategy. People who live by noise cannot understand disciplined silence. They assumed that because I was not reacting, I had no defense. Because I was not shouting, I must be defeated. Because I was not performing pain publicly, I must be powerless. But I was never silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because not everything deserves my words. I was studying. I was healing. I was watching patterns reveal themselves. I was letting people expose their own hearts without interruption. Every rumor showed me who enjoyed confusion. Every false accusation showed me who lacked integrity. Every betrayal showed me who had access but not loyalty. I did not need to rush into the chaos. I needed to outlast it. So I chose focus over frenzy. I chose healing over defending. I chose wisdom over spectacle. And that choice changed everything. While they exhausted themselves trying to control perception, I was doing the deeper work of rebuilding from within. Their noise made them the center of a mess. My restraint made me the center of gravity. They looked frantic. I became unshakable. That is why I stand now with peace they cannot imitate. They also weaponized familiarity. They did not come at me like strangers. They came through memory, trust, shared history, old wounds, and vulnerable moments. They reached for what was closest to my heart and tried to turn it against me. They dug through my past, pulled at my pain, recycled my lowest seasons, and tried to present my history as proof against my future. That is how I knew this was deeper than dislike. This was not ordinary conflict. This was targeted warfare. They used my scars as talking points. They used my mistakes as identity labels. They used my trauma as entertainment. They used my humanity as an accusation. Some smiled while gathering information. Some offered concern while feeding gossip. Some pretended to care while participating in the damage. But what they failed to understand is this. I had already begun redeeming the very things they tried to use against me. I was not running from my past. I was transforming it. So every time they reached for an old wound, they only reminded me how far I had come. Every time they tried to shame me, they handed me more material for my becoming. They thought my history would imprison me. Instead, it became the ground I built on. They wanted my story to sound like evidence of brokenness. God turned it into evidence of survival. What they meant as exposure became proof of my transformation. And that is why I am still here. Because I was never meant to be defined by the hands that mishandled me. I was meant to be revealed by the fire that refined me. This is not merely a story of betrayal. It is a story of reversal. They came with numbers. They came with noise. They came with rehearsed narratives and coordinated attacks. But they underestimated endurance. They underestimated restraint. They underestimated what happens when a person stops seeking validation from people and starts standing in truth. They thought they were ending my story. In reality, they were introducing the strongest chapter of my life. I was not just surviving an attack. I was being prepared through it. And now the truth is clear. I was never the one being destroyed. I was the one being revealed.